August 4th, 2020. A scorching afternoon in Beirut, Lebanon, but initially just another normal summer day. In an instant, however, that was all about to change. Around 6 p.m., the ground shook, the air filled with a deafening roar. People nearby looked out of their windows, wondering what was happening. Just 30 seconds later, a second massive explosion tore through the city's port, leveling the area, rocking the entire country, and ultimately leaving behind a trail of devastation that would require years to recover. The Beirut port explosion killed over 200 people, injured thousands, and destroyed entire neighborhoods, causing billions of dollars in damages across the city. As the dust settled, it appeared the blast would be the latest in a series of crises rocking the country, from the COVID-19 pandemic to its own devastating economic collapse of recent years. For years, Lebanon's economy had already been in freefall, and now matters only look worse. Fueled by corruption, mismanagement, and a massive debt burden, the crisis has resulted in hyperinflation, soaring unemployment, and shortages of basic necessities such as food, medicine, and fuel, bringing the country to the brink of collapse. In this video, we'll examine the root cause of the Lebanese economic crisis, its impact on the Lebanese people, and explore potential solutions to this ongoing disaster. To understand the full extent of Lebanon's economic collapse, let's get a better idea of just how bad the situation really is. One of the worst financial crises in recent history, and easily the worst in Lebanon's history, the situation first began to unravel in October 2019 and has rapidly declined since. The World Bank has estimated that Lebanon's GDP plunged from almost $55 billion in 2018 to about $20.5 billion in 2021. In fact, in 2020 alone, Lebanon's GDP fell an astounding 21.4%. Alongside this collapse in productivity, the Lebanese pound has been decimated, losing some 95% of its value since 2019. Employment rates have not fared any better, with unemployment increasing from 11.4% in 2018 to an incredible 29.6% in 2022. Another feature of the crisis is that ordinary depositors are unable to access their US dollars due to restrictions imposed by banks. Even if they choose to withdraw in the local currency, exchange rates significantly decrease the value of their money, sometimes by up to 95%. The difficulties don't end there. As the currency has collapsed, the middle class has collapsed too. The World Bank now classifies Lebanon as a lower middle-income country, a full step down from the upper middle-income status it held in July 2022. To put all this into perspective, the World Bank points out that such a brutal contraction is usually associated with conflicts or wars. In a nutshell, Lebanon's economic collapse has been near total. However, to fully understand its origin, we need to take a closer look at the root causes. Lebanon was once called the Switzerland of the Middle East, but today this couldn't be further from the truth. While the country's economic crisis seemingly began in 2019, it stems from factors that have been present for years, namely unsustainable debt accumulation, an ongoing currency crisis, and deeply rooted political corruption and instability, all of which were then exasperated by additional crises like the COVID-19 pandemic and the Beirut port explosion of 2020. The roots of the crisis go back to Lebanon's enormous amount of foreign debt, which it turned to after the civil war to finance its restructuring. As a result, the country's debt-to-GDP ratio reached almost 173% by 2019, making it the third most indebted country in the world by that measure. This was worsened by a growing trade deficit as well, as a slowing of remittances from abroad as political instability increased across the region. To cope, the government was forced to spend significantly to service the debt. Interest payments surged to about a third or more of the entire budget. Clearly, this was unsustainable. Underneath it all, with the stirrings of a liquidity crisis brewing, Lebanon's central bank, led by its governor Riyad Salema, enacted what soon became known as the swap, a range of financial engineering mechanisms that would amount to mismanagement of epic proportions. In essence, the formula was as follows. By exchanging public debt in Lebanese pounds for euro bonds and then exchanging them for actual foreign currency with commercial banks, a crisis was temporarily avoided. But this only increased the public debt in dollars and, in the end, cost the economy a fortune, many billions by some estimates. Things stabilized for a time, but the country failed to attract sufficient foreign inflows to match growing demand, resulting in some banks restricting depositors' access to their own funds in foreign currency. As the black market exchange rate for dollars diverged and mass protests exploded across the nation, the Lebanese currency quickly came crashing down. A massive liquidity crisis ensued, one that would cripple the Lebanese economy, shutter its banking sector, and result in unbelievable suffering and hardship on the part of the people. Throughout 2019, mass protests raged across the country. Lebanon's central bank was accused of running a Ponzi scheme as it relied on new borrowing to service the debt. Banks shut their doors as they didn't have enough dollars to pay depositors. The Lebanese pound collapsed, falling from £1,500 to the dollar to about £23,000 in late January 2022, after hitting $34,000 earlier in the month. Additionally, in 2020, Beirut defaulted on its $1.2 billion euro bond debt, the first sovereign default in Lebanese history. Amongst all this economic catastrophe, the nation also had to deal with the domestic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, including intermittent lockdowns and decreases in tourism, along with the devastating impact of the Beirut port explosion in 2020, which has cost billions in damages. Altogether, Lebanon's economic crisis would reach historic levels and plunge the nation into disaster. Of course, the greatest victims of Lebanon's economic catastrophe have been its people. The crisis has resulted in shortages of fuel and power, high food insecurity, and a massive exodus of people, including doctors and other professionals. Banks have limited withdrawals, frozen depositors out of their dollar accounts, and the government's default on its foreign debt has cost the country billions. Lack of government assistance has left millions of people in poverty, and the majority of households are struggling to make ends meet. Households with lower incomes face the most hardship, but even households with higher incomes are struggling to pay for essentials. Nearly 4 out of 5 households have had an earner lose employment since the crisis started in 2019, and about 15% remain unemployed since. The median household monthly income is just $122, and 40% of households earn approximately $100 or less per month. Food insecurity is also widespread, with more than 1 in 4 households reporting an adult having to skip a meal. Most strikingly, nearly 1 in 5 households outside of the top 20% said they had run out of food in the previous month. Unsurprisingly, the crisis has resulted in a record 63% of people surveyed wanting to leave permanently, and many of those individuals are doctors, leaving hospitals operating at only about 50% capacity. Many international organizations, like Human Rights Watch, have called for more government action to protect the millions of individuals who have been left entirely unprotected and unable to meet their most basic needs. Altogether, the Lebanese economic crisis requires deep, systematic change to address its root causes. While corruption, mismanagement, and a massive debt burden have all contributed, there is no simple solution at hand. All of this inherently begs the question: what is being done to help stem the crisis? And beyond present measures, what more can be done? As it stands today, little decisive action has been taken, resulting in an economic meltdown that has been described as chaotic yet uneventful. Instead, ruling elites and politicians have been allowing the situation to unfold in a sort of business-as-usual approach, one that has normalized the mass suffering and discontent of its people. Outside of Lebanon, then, the international community has a key role to play, not only by providing aid, but also by applying pressure on the Lebanese state and elites to demand accountability and change. This could take many forms, but first and foremost, other countries must stop providing lifelines to Lebanon's corrupt elites through all manners of financial and political support. Additionally, Human Rights Watch has called for the urgent implementation of a universal, rights-based social protection system to address the ongoing economic crisis and ensures that everyone has access to food and income security. The system would need to provide basic guarantees such as child, disability, and unemployment benefits, as well as old age pensions. Poverty-targeted programs would play a role, but ideally shouldn't be the foundation of such a system. The government could also be pressed to mobilize domestic resources, such as taxing the wealthy, to extend coverages and progressively reach universal social protection. Aside from systemic, internal change, macroeconomic stabilization is also crucial. According to Hussein Chaito, A Beirut-based development economist, the Lebanese financial sector must redistribute losses and protect small depositors and low-income individuals in order to reduce the growing income gap. However, existing social assistance programs are currently insufficient, and a national social protection strategy is yet to be adopted. According to Saroj Kumarjar, regional director at the World Bank, the risk of a dangerous depletion of resources, along with the loss of skilled labor, could lead to a permanent social and economic loss for the country. To reverse the fall of the Lebanese economy, a reform-minded government is needed, one that can chart a path toward economic and financial recovery, working closely with all stakeholders, domestic and international. While many concerns certainly remain, ultimately a comprehensive, coordinated approach is necessary to protect citizens and build a better, brighter future for Lebanon. All in all, the economic crisis in Lebanon has been developing for years, driven by unsustainable debt, political corruption, and a currency crisis. The situation has been further exasperated by external factors like the COVID-19 pandemic and the Beirut port explosion. As a result, Lebanon's economy has suffered one of the worst financial crises in its history, with plunging GDP, soaring unemployment, hyperinflation, and a collapsing currency. While potential solutions to the crisis exist, the road to recovery will be long and difficult, requiring comprehensive reforms to address corruption and mismanagement, as well as international aid and investment to support the country's recovery. But ultimately, only time will tell.